So the problem is, a lot of sci-fi games these days is just lazy. It's just generic soldiers shooting generic bad guys, but the guns go pew pew instead of bang bang, and everything is covered in neon lights. That's not sci-fi, that's just a costume party. I'm talking about the games that actually use the setting to do something crazy, the ones that give you gadgets that make you feel like a god, or drop you into atmospheres so thick you can practically smell the ozone. We're covering the mind benders, the space operas, and the terrifying glimpses of the future that feel a little too real. If you're looking to leave Earth behind for a while, these are the best sci-fi games you need to play. Mass Effect Legendary Edition is pretty much the gold standard for how you bring old games back without ruining them. This package includes the whole trilogy and almost all the extra content they released over the years, so the value is just ridiculous. Back when the first game came out in 2007, it was honestly kind of a mess to play because the shooting felt stiff and the inventory system was a total nightmare. But this remaster fixed a lot of that junk, so now you can actually enjoy the combat without wanting to throw your controller. The whole point here is that you create your own Commander Shepard and carry that same character through 3 massive games. The unique thing that no other game has really pulled off since is how your choices carry over across the entire trilogy. If you decide to save a specific alien race in the first game or punch a reporter in the face, it actually comes back to help or haunt you 2 games later.
By running away while millions of people on Earth die.
The combat evolves from a heavy RPG style in the first one to a snappy cover shooter by the second and third game. You get cool powers like lifting enemies into the air with biotics or freezing them solid. But honestly, the gameplay is just the stuff you do between the real highlights, which are the conversations. The writing is the main star here because you build relationships with your crewmates on the Normandy ship. You talk to them after every mission and learn about their lives, and it feels genuine. It is weird to say, but you actually start missing these fictional alien people when the game is over. The ending of the third game is still kind of controversial and people hate it, but the journey to get there is totally worth it. It's a long ride, and you'll probably sink 100 hours into this easily. Titanfall 2 is famous for being one of the most unlucky games ever released because EA sent it out to die right between a new Battlefield and a new Call of Duty. It sold poorly because people did not have money for 3 games in 2 weeks, but it ended up being better than both of those huge franchises. The developers at Respawn were the original creators of Call of Duty Modern Warfare, so they knew exactly how to make a gun feel good to shoot. The campaign is the real highlight here, because the first Titanfall game was multiplayer only, and everyone was worried this one would be an afterthought. You play as a rifleman named Jack Cooper who inherits a Titan named BT-7274 after his original pilot dies in the first 10 minutes. The writing for BT is genius because he is a robot who does not understand jokes or sarcasm, and the bond you form with him over the 6-hour story is surprisingly emotional. The level design is unmatched, and every mission introduces a new mechanic that you use for 20 minutes, and then they throw it away before it gets boring. The absolute best level is called Effect and Cause, and it gives you a wrist device that lets you time travel between the past and present with a single button press. You have to jump across a gap in the past and then warp to the present to land on a platform, and then warp back to fight enemies, and it is super smooth. The movement system is built on speed, so you are constantly wall running and sliding and double jumping to build up momentum. If you stop moving, you basically die, so it forces you to play fast and aggressive. The multiplayer is also chaotic and fun because you start as a pilot running around fast, and then you call down your massive Titan from the sky, and the gameplay shifts to heavy robot combat. It is honestly tragic that we will probably never get a sequel, because this game is a masterpiece that got ignored for all the wrong reasons.
I will not lose another pilot.
Cyberpunk 2077 is a living, breathing city you can get lost in. Night City feels like a monster in itself, huge and unpredictable, always moving around you. The streets are a riot of colors, noise, and chaos, packed with people trying to survive however they can. You've got gangs doing their thing, shady dealers on every corner, cops chasing criminals, and citizens who might help you or try to rob you. Towering skyscrapers stretch up so high that sometimes you can't even see the sky, and neon lights flicker everywhere, casting everything in this strange, almost unreal glow. Walking or driving through it all, you notice tiny details. The way a street vendor wipes down their cart, the graffiti scrawled on an abandoned building, the holographic ads screaming for attention above the chaos. First-person perspective makes it feel even more alive. You're not just controlling a character, you're in this world. Every conversation, every threat, every glance feels personal because you're right there, looking people in the eyes. It makes the tension real, and it makes the city feel dangerous in a way that most other games can't capture. The gameplay starts subtle, but quickly snowballs into pure, over-the-top freedom. Once you start upgrading, the city opens up in ways that make it feel like a playground built for chaos. You can rip open doors with your bare hands, slice through enemies and objects like a laser whip, or leap across rooftops in ways that make you feel unstoppable. Weapons are wild, especially some of the high-tech ones that can punch through walls or completely change how you approach fights. You can build your character any way you like, stealthy and silent, sneaking through shadows and throwing knives, or a full-on powerhouse, knocking people over with a shotgun. Hacking adds another layer, letting you manipulate cameras, set traps, or make enemies' cars crash without even showing up on the battlefield. And driving? It's heavy, fast, and satisfying. Cruising through rain-soaked streets at night with techno blasting from your car speakers feels like its own kind of storytelling, a moment where the city and you are completely in sync. What really makes it stick, though, is the world itself. Night City is dark, gritty, and unforgiving. There's very little sugarcoating, and the stories you experience leave an impression long after you've put the controller down. Every corner has a little story happening, every character has a life beyond you, and every decision matters. It's chaotic, dangerous, and exhilarating, and it nails the feeling of being just one person trying to survive and maybe thrive in a city that doesn't care about you. Dead Space Remake is basically the perfect example of how you make a horror game actually scary without just using cheap jump scares every 5 seconds. The sound design is the main character here because you are stuck on this giant mining ship called the Ishimura, and it constantly makes noises that mess with your head. You hear vents rattling and pipes hissing and distant screams, and you never know if it is a monster or just the ship falling apart. The unique thing that makes this game stand out is the combat system, because headshots do not work at all. In almost every other shooter, you aim for the head, but here you have to unlearn that and focus on cutting off limbs. You use a tool called the plasma cutter to slice off the arms and legs of these monsters called necromorphs to stop them from charging at you. It makes every fight feel panicked and messy because you are desperately trying to line up your laser sights while a freakish creature with blades for hands is running right at your face. The remake is special because they added this thing called the Intensity Director, which is an invisible system that watches how you are playing. If you've been walking through quiet hallways for too long, it might decide to break a vent or flicker the lights, or spawn an enemy just to keep you stressed out. It means two people can play the same level and have totally different experiences. They also changed the zero gravity sections completely, so now you can actually fly around freely in space using thrusters on your boots instead of just hopping from wall to wall like the old version. Isaac Clarke is the guy you play as, and he's an engineer, not a soldier, so his armor looks heavy and industrial, and he stomps around with real weight. The developers made the whole ship one giant interconnected map with zero loading screens, so you can walk from the bridge to the engine room without the game ever pausing. It keeps you immersed the entire time, and the lighting is so dark and moody that you'll probably be using your weapon flashlight just to see where you are going. This is easily one of the most intense survival horror experiences you could find, and it looks absolutely disgusting in the best way possible. Alright, quick thing before we continue the video. I let a random bot picker decide my mobile games. It chose Mech Arena as the main grind, and Legend of Elements and Legend of Mushroom as side games between matches. I wanted to see how fast you can start Mech Arena without cheating, and that's when I found the Aptoide version of the game, which I honestly didn't know had extra stuff. From the Aptoide version, you start with a 5-star Brickhouse mech, Impulse, the Xaviera pilot, Cryo Launcher 8, 500 HC, and 100,000 credits. That's not a small bonus. That's basically skipping weeks of early grind. And there's one more thing. If you install Mech Arena using the Aptoide link in my description and use my code MECH, you can get up to 25% cash back on in-game purchases through Aptoide. So if you already spend on the game, this just gives you money back. I'll leave the Aptoide link and code in the description and pinned comment. Just make sure it's the Aptoide version or you won't get the rewards. Alright, now let's see how broken this account actually is. Prey 2017 is honestly one of the most misunderstood games of the last decade because Bethesda really messed up the marketing. They forced the developers at Arcane Studios to use the name Prey even though this game has absolutely nothing to do with the old Alien shooter from 2006. It confused everyone and people thought it was a sequel or a remake, but it is actually its own unique thing that plays more like BioShock in space. The setup is fascinating because it takes place in an alternate history where President Kennedy survived his assassination and the space race never ended, so technology looks super advanced but also weirdly old-fashioned with 1960s furniture. You play as Morgan Yu and you are stuck on this massive space station called Talos 1 that has been taken over by aliens called the Typhon. The game messes with your head immediately because the first hour is a fake simulation, and when you break out of it, you realize you have been living a lie. The scariest enemy is a little spider thing called a mimic, and it is the coolest mechanic in the game. These things can shapeshift into literally any physics object in the room. You walk into a hallway and see 2 garbage cans, but your brain tells you there should only be 1, so you panic. You end up smacking every single coffee mug and chair with your wrench just to make sure it is not an alien waiting to kill you. It creates this constant paranoia that never really goes away. The best tool you get is the glue cannon, and it is not a normal gun. It shoots this foam that hardens instantly so you can freeze enemies in place, but the smart players use it to build. You can shoot globs on the wall to make your own staircase and climb up to areas you are not supposed to reach yet. It lets you break the game in really fun ways because the developers want you to solve problems however you want.
The next floor and grab some extra stuff.
Another satisfying thing is the recycler charge, which is basically a grenade that creates a mini black hole. You throw it into a room full of boxes and chairs and enemies, and it sucks everything in and spits out perfect little cubes of raw material that you use for crafting ammo. It is weirdly addicting to just clean up trash with black hole. You upgrade your character using neuromods, which are these scary needles you have to jam directly into your eyeball. If you scan the aliens enough, you can actually learn their powers and turn into a coffee cup yourself to roll through small gaps in windows. The game watches everything you do, including who you save and who you let die, and it gives you a different ending based on your empathy. It is a masterpiece of design that lets you play your own way, but it's sold poorly because of the confusing name, which is a total shame.
We can fight the invasion. If I can't save us, I'm taking every last one of them with me.
System Shock Remake is interesting because it is the grandfather of basically every smart shooter you have ever played, like BioShock or Deus Ex. The original came out way back in 1994, and it was so complicated that nobody really knew how to play it. Night Dive Studios is the team that made this remake, and they went through development hell to get it done. They launched a Kickstarter years ago and then delayed it over and over, and even restarted the whole project at one point because they lost their way. But they finally put it out, and it is exactly what it needed to be. This is not like the Resident Evil 4 remake where they changed everything to make it feel modern and smooth. This is a game that respects the old school design, where nobody holds your hand and you have to figure everything out yourself. You play as a hacker on Citadel Station, and there are no objective markers telling you where to go. Modern games usually put yellow paint on ledges or give you a big arrow on a compass, but here you just have to look at the map and listen to audio logs to find door codes. It feels refreshing because the game actually treats you like you have a brain. The main villain is Shodan, and she is legit one of the best bad guys in gaming history. She's an evil AI who took over the station, and she constantly mocks you and calls you an insect while glitching out. Her voice actress is the same one from 30 years ago, and she sounds terrifying. The graphics are super cool because they went for this retro look where the textures are pixelated up close, but the lighting and shadows are super realistic. It looks like how you remember old games looking in your head, but way better. The inventory system is basically Tetris because you have to rotate your guns and ammo and patch cables to make them fit in your backpack. It is stressful when you are trying to pick up a new weapon while a mutant cyborg is hitting you with a pipe. The combat is a bit clunky and simple compared to something like Doom, but that is not the point. The point is exploring this maze of a station and unlocking new areas slowly. It is a bit janky, and if you get lost, you might get annoyed, but that is just how games used to be back in the 90s. If you want to see where BioShock stole all its ideas from, you have to play this.
Do you think you can stand up, God? I will shape the earth in my image.
Fallout New Vegas is widely considered the best modern Fallout game, and it is honestly kind of embarrassing for Bethesda because they did not even make it. Obsidian Entertainment made this masterpiece, and they were given only 18 months to build the entire thing, which is an insane deadline for an open-world RPG. They basically took the engine and assets from Fallout 3 and wrote a script that was a million times smarter and more reactive to what the player actually does. The setup is simple because you are not trying to find your dad or your son or save the world. You are just a courier who got shot in the head and buried in a shallow grave, and you want to find the guy in the checkered suit who did it. This gives you total freedom to be whoever you want because you have no baggage or family history dragging you down. The writing is the main reason people still play this game 15 years later because the factions are actually complicated. You have the New California Republic who are trying to bring democracy back, but they are corrupt and incompetent. And then you have Caesar's Legion who are a bunch of LARPers dressed as Romans engaging in slavery. Then there is Mr. House who is a libertarian billionaire brain in a jar controlling the strip. The game lets you side with any of them, or you can just kill everyone and take over Vegas for yourself using a robot army. The dialogue system is brilliant because your skills actually matter in conversations, so if you have high explosive skill, you can tell someone exactly how to defuse a bomb, or if you have low intelligence, your character literally speaks like a caveman. The gameplay is definitely janky because the engine was old even when it came out, so the shooting feels floaty and stiff. You rely a lot on VATS, which is the system that pauses time and lets you target specific body parts with a percentage chance to hit. It's basically a fancy way to cover up the bad shooting mechanics, but it looks cool when heads explode in slow motion. Survival mode is a big deal here because you have to drink water and eat food and sleep or else you die, which makes walking through the Mojave Desert feel like an actual struggle. The game is notoriously buggy, and it will probably crash on you a few times because the code is held together by duct tape and prayers. But despite the glitches and the ugly brown color filter over everything, it is the deepest role-playing experience in the series. It respects your choices and lets you solve quests in 5 different ways instead of just forcing you to shoot everything. It feels like a real world where your actions have consequences, and that is why people are still obsessed with it today. Control is basically what happens when the developers at Remedy Entertainment decide to stop caring about what is normal and just make the weirdest game possible. These are the same Finnish guys who made Max Payne and Alan Wake, so they have been doing this for 20 years, but Control is on another level. It is heavily inspired by those SCP Foundation stories you read online where people catalog haunted objects. You play as Jesse Faden and you walk into this massive, brutalist skyscraper in New York called the Oldest House, which is the headquarters for the Federal Bureau of Control. The building itself is alive and shifts its walls around, and the whole vibe is this mix of boring government office bureaucracy and terrifying cosmic horror. You see posters about missing pencils next to floating bodies, and it creates this super unique atmosphere that feels cold and creepy. The gameplay is totally carried by the physics engine because it is honestly one of the most destructive games I have ever played. You get telekinetic powers pretty early on, and the main one is called Launch, which lets you rip chunks of concrete out of the floor or pick up copy machines and hurl them at enemies. The destruction is insane because when you get into a fight in an office area, the papers fly everywhere and the desks shatter into wood splinters and the glass breaks realistically. It feels incredibly powerful to just walk into a room and wreck everything without even touching it. Your gun is called the service weapon, and it is a living object that shifts its shape to become a pistol or a shotgun or a sniper rifle. You do not find ammo on the ground because the gun just recharges its energy, so the combat has this perfect flow where you shoot until it's empty and then throw rocks with your mind while it cools down. One of the coolest things about the game is how little it explains to you. There are no long cutscenes explaining the lore, you just have to read these blacked out government documents scattered around to figure out why a rubber duck is locked in a high security cell. The absolute peak of the game is a mission called the Ashtray Maze, where the walls literally dance around you while heavy metal music plays in the background. It's one of those moments that makes you just sit back and smile because it is so well executed. It turns out the whole game is actually connected to the Alan Wake universe, which was a huge mind blow for fans of that series. It's a smart and stylish game that feels great to play, even if the map is confusing and you get lost looking for the elevator constantly. NieR Automata is like a game that really doesn't show its true self at the start. On the surface, it looks like a stylish action game where you run around slicing enemies with big swords, and yeah, it does that really well. The combat is fast, smooth, and super satisfying. Dodging feels almost too good because you can avoid hits at the very last second and instantly counter. You can equip 2 weapons at the same time, usually something light and something heavy, and switch between them mid-combo, which keeps fights feeling fluid instead of stiff or repetitive. On top of that, you've got this floating robot companion that acts like a gun, so you're constantly firing while moving and slashing. It turns even simple fights into these cool, non-stop action moments. What really sets the game apart is how often it messes with your expectations. The camera and gameplay style change all the time. You'll be exploring a fully 3D ruined city, then walk into a building, and suddenly the game turns into a side-scrolling action section. A little later, it might feel like a top-down arcade shooter where you're dodging tons of projectiles. It sounds like it shouldn't work, but the transitions are smooth and it keeps the game feeling fresh. You never feel like you're doing the exact same thing for too long. The chip system is another big reason the game feels different. Since you're playing as androids, your abilities are treated like hardware. Things you usually take for granted in games, like seeing your health or having a minimap, are optional and take up space. You only have so much room, so you're always choosing between quality of life stuff and combat upgrades. Do you want more damage, faster attacks, or better awareness of the world? That constant trade-off makes customization feel meaningful instead of just equip everything and move on. The world itself isn't massive, but it's packed with personality. You spend time in the same areas, so they start to feel familiar instead of disposable. There's this quiet, lonely vibe everywhere, with ruined cities, empty deserts, and strange places that feel both broken and oddly beautiful. The music plays a huge role too. It's emotional without being loud or annoying, and it really sells the mood while you're just wandering around or fighting enemies. NieR Automata also asks for more commitment than most action games, but it earns it by changing how things play out instead of just repeating content. It doesn't rush you and it doesn't explain everything right away. You're meant to sit with the world, the mechanics, and the atmosphere and let it all slowly sink in. By the time you're deep into it, you realize it's not just an action game at all. It's something way more thoughtful and weird. It's the kind of game that doesn't hit everyone the same way, but if it clicks, it really sticks. Even after you're done playing, you'll probably still be thinking about its world, its music, and how different it felt compared to most big action games. Deus Ex Human Revolution is the game that proved you can actually bring back a classic series without ruining it, because before this came out, nobody thought Eidos Montreal could pull it off. It came out in 2011, which was honestly a golden age for gaming, and it stands out because it has this super unique art style that is just covered in black and gold. Everything in the world looks like a Renaissance painting mixed with futuristic cyberpunk tech, and it makes the atmosphere feel expensive and dirty at the same time. Play as Adam Jensen, who is an ex-cop turned security chief, and the game starts with you getting absolutely wrecked and thrown through a glass wall. The doctors have to rebuild you with cybernetic parts to save your life, and the best part is that Adam hates it. He spends the whole game grumbling about how he never asked for this, and it gives him a really cool grumpy personality compared to other heroes who love their powers.
I never asked for this.
The gameplay is the definition of freedom because it is an immersive sim, which means the developers give you problems but they do not tell you how to solve them. You have these augmentations, which are tech upgrades installed in your body, and they let you break the rules of the level completely. You can upgrade your legs to jump 3 meters in the air and find a vent on the roof to sneak in, or you can upgrade your skin to be bulletproof and just walk through the front door with a shotgun. One of the coolest upgrades is the Icarus landing system, which lets you jump off a skyscraper and land safely with a huge shockwave that knocks enemies down. There's also the Typhoon system, which turns your body into a human grenade and shoots explosive ball bearings everywhere to clear a whole room instantly. The hacking minigame is actually fun too, because you have to capture nodes on a grid before the security system traces you and locks you out.
Access granted.
The most unique mechanic that people still talk about is the social boss battles, where you do not fight with guns but with words. You get into intense arguments with characters and you have to read their body language and pick the right dialogue options to convince them to help you. You can even buy a specific augmentation called the KZ mod that analyzes their pheromones and tells you if they're lying or getting angry so you can manipulate them better. It feels way smarter than just shooting a guy until his health bar goes down. The story gets really deep about transhumanism, which is just the idea of people merging with machines, and it asks if we are losing our souls by upgrading our bodies. The only bad part originally was the boss fights, because they forced you to kill them even if you were playing a peaceful run, but they fixed that in the director's cut version. It is a legendary game that respects your intelligence and lets you play exactly how you want. Horizon Zero Dawn is basically the coolest concept ever put into a video game because it is just cavemen fighting robot dinosaurs with bows and arrows. It was a huge risk for the developers at Guerrilla Games because before this they only made the Killzone series, which were just dark and gray shooters. They spent years making this colorful open world and it totally paid off because it is one of the best looking games on the PlayStation. The story takes place 1,000 years in the future after human civilization collapsed, and now people live in primitive tribes and think technology is magic. You play as Aloy, who is an outcast with no parents, and she finds this little earpiece called a focus when she is a kid. This device lets her scan the machines to see their weak points and track their paths, which gives you a huge advantage over everyone else who is just swinging spears blindly. The combat is the best part of the game, and it is completely different from other open world titles. You cannot just run in and hit things because the machines are made of steel and they will crush you instantly. You have to play like a hunter. You use your focus to highlight glowing yellow parts on the enemies, and then you use specific arrows to shoot those parts off. If a robot has a gun on its back, you can shoot the gun off and pick it up to use against them. The weapons are super creative, especially the rope caster, which lets you shoot steel cables into a machine and tie it down to the ground so it cannot move. It feels amazing to trap a giant T-Rex robot called a Thunderjaw and then freeze it with ice bombs before shattering its armor. You also have the Tripcaster, which lays down electric tripwires that stun enemies if they charge at you. The stealth is also really important because you spend a lot of time hiding in this tall red grass waiting for the right moment to strike. The machines actually act like real animals, so you have herds of grazers that run away if they get spooked and aggressive predators that will hunt you down if they see you. The mystery of the story is actually super interesting because you are trying to figure out what happened to the old world and why there are giant metal ruins everywhere. You explore these underground bunkers called cauldrons where the machines are made, and it turns into a sci-fi dungeon crawler. The graphics engine is called Decima, and it is the same one used for Death Stranding, so the lighting and the nature look incredible. It's a long game with a massive map, and fighting a robot bird on top of a snowy mountain is an experience you won't forget. Detroit Becomes Human isn't really about sci-fi gadgets or flashy future tech. The sci-fi part is just the setup. What the game is actually doing is asking a very old human question in a modern way. What happens when something we created starts thinking and feeling for itself? The game takes place in a near-future Detroit where androids are everywhere. They cook, clean, work jobs humans don't want anymore, and they do it without complaining. At first, it all feels clean and efficient, almost perfect, but that perfection is exactly what makes the world uncomfortable. Androids are treated like objects, talked down to, abused, and discarded the moment they stop working right. The game doesn't rush this. It lets you sit in it and notice how normal this cruelty has become. You experience this world through 3 androids, and that's one of the smartest choices the game makes. Connor is a police android designed to hunt down deviant androids. He represents control, logic, and order. Playing as him feels cold and precise. You analyze crime scenes, reconstruct events, and chase targets like a machine would. But the more you play, the more the game quietly asks whether Connor is really just following code or if something else is starting to grow inside him.
I'm whatever you want me to be, Lieutenant. Your partner? Your buddy to drink with? Or just a machine? Designed to accomplish a task.
Marcus is the opposite side of the story. He begins as a caretaker android, but his path turns into something much bigger. His story is about rebellion, leadership, and choice. What makes Marcus interesting is that the game doesn't force him to be a hero or a villain. You decide what kind of revolution he leads, peaceful or violent, hopeful or angry, and the game actually reacts to that in real ways, not just small dialogue changes.
Then we will die free.
Then there's Kara, and her story is the most grounded and emotional. Kara isn't trying to change the world, she's just trying to survive and protect a child. Her chapters feel smaller, quieter, and more personal, but that's why they hit so hard. Through Kara, the game explores fear, love, and sacrifice in a way that feels very human, even though she isn't. Gameplay-wise, Detroit is mostly about choices and consequences. You're not mastering combat or learning complex systems. You're making decisions under pressure, sometimes with a timer ticking down, sometimes without knowing the full picture. The game shows you the branching paths after each chapter, which might sound like it would ruin the mystery, but it actually does the opposite. It makes you realize how many moments could have gone differently, and how close you were to losing someone or changing everything. What really sells Detroit as a sci-fi game is how believable it feels. This isn't some far-off future with aliens and space travel. It feels like a world we could realistically drift into. Facial animations, voice acting, and music all work together to make characters feel real. You can see fear in their faces, hesitation in their movements, and doubt in their voices. That level of detail is what makes the choices hurt when they go wrong. Detroit Become Human is the kind of sci-fi that sticks with you after the credits roll, not because of explosions or plot twists, but because it forces you to reflect on control, freedom, and empathy. It doesn't tell you what the right answer is. It lets you live with the consequences of the answers you chose, and that's what makes it powerful.
Reports that hundreds of androids have been stolen from Cyberpunk stores.
Deliver Us the Moon is one of those hidden indie gems that came out of nowhere and honestly embarrassed some of the big studios because it looks incredible for a low-budget project. It was made by this small Dutch team called Kyoki Interactive, and you can tell they poured their whole heart into it. The story is straight up terrifying because it is set in a near future where Earth has completely run out of energy and turned into a giant dust bowl. The only thing keeping humanity alive was this special energy source called helium-3 that we were mining from the moon, but suddenly the moon colony went dark and stopped sending power. You play as the absolute last astronaut on Earth, and your job is to fly a rocket up there alone and figure out what went wrong and turn the lights back on. It is a super lonely experience because there are no aliens or monsters to shoot. It is just you and the empty, silent corridors of this abandoned space station. The gameplay is really cool because it switches perspectives to keep things fresh. When you are inside the space stations, floating around in zero gravity, the game is in first person, so you feel like you are actually looking through the helmet. You have to use your suit thrusters to navigate through debris and manage your oxygen levels, which is stressful because you can hear your character breathing harder as the air runs out. Then, when you land on the actual surface of the moon, the camera pulls back to third person so you can see the environment. You get to drive this moon rover buggy, and the physics are great because it feels heavy but also bouncy, exactly how you would expect a car on the moon to feel. You also find this little floating robot buddy called an ASE unit, and he is basically your key to solving puzzles. You can actually take control of him and fly into small vents or broken pipes to press buttons that your human character cannot. One of the most satisfying mechanics is using the laser cutter tool on your arm. You have to manually slice through the hinges of locked doors or cut away clamps to release machinery, and it feels super tactile. The storytelling is done through these hologram recordings that you find scattered around the base. It's like a ghost story where you walk into a room and trigger a recording to see orange digital ghosts acting out the final moments of the crew. You watch them arguing and panicking and saying goodbye to their families, and it makes the whole place feel haunted even though nothing is attacking you. It is a short game you can beat in 1 or 2 sittings, but the pacing is perfect because it feels like playing through a high-budget sci-fi movie. The launch sequence at the very beginning where you have to manually flip all the switches in the cockpit to start the rocket is still one of the most immersive moments in any space game.
Rocket boosters, ignition stop. Engines ready in 5, 4, 3, 2, start 1. We have liftoff.
Quantum Break is honestly one of the most ambitious experiments in gaming history because Remedy Entertainment decided to make a video game and a live-action TV show at the exact same time and mash them together. It came out back in 2016 and people were confused because after every chapter of the game, you have to sit down and watch a 20-minute episode of a real show with real actors. It sounds like a gimmick, but it actually works surprisingly well because the game follows the heroes trying to save the world and the show follows the villains trying to stop them. You play as Jack Joyce, who was played by the guy who was Iceman in the X-Men movies, and your main enemy is played by Littlefinger from Game of Thrones, so the acting is top tier. The story kicks off when a time travel experiment at a university goes horribly wrong, and time itself starts breaking down. You get hit with chronon radiation, which gives you superpowers, but it also means the universe is slowly freezing, and you have to fix it before time stops forever. The gameplay makes you feel like a total superhero because you do not just shoot guns, you weaponize time itself. You throw a bubble of frozen time at an enemy to trap them in place and then pump 100 bullets into the bubble. When the bubble pops, all those bullets hit the guy at the exact same second and he goes flying across the room. You also have a dash move that lets you teleport short distances to flank enemies, and a shield that stops bullets in midair right in front of your face. It looks absolutely incredible because when you use your powers, the air ripples and cracks like broken glass. The graphics are still some of the best ever ever made because of the lighting agent. There are these moments called stutters where time completely stops for the whole world except you. You'll walk through a room where an explosion is frozen in midair and debris is hanging around you and people are stuck screaming, and you just walk past them casually. It is eerie and beautiful and makes for some crazy platforming sections where you have to jump across falling cars that are stuck in time. The coolest mechanic is called a junction point, where you actually switch characters and play as the main villain, Paul Serene. You have to make a hard decision that changes how the story plays out, and it actually changes the TV show episodes you watch. If you decide to kill a witness in the game, that character will be dead in the show, and the other characters will react to it. It makes the file size of the game absolutely massive, because it has to store all these high-quality video files, but it is worth it for the experience. The final boss fight is a bit annoying and sudden, but the journey to get there is a wild ride. It's a cinematic shooter that feels heavy and expensive, and there's really nothing else like it because nobody else was crazy enough to try mixing a game with a TV series again. It's a unique piece of history that plays great and looks even better. Death Stranding is easily the most divisive game of the last generation because half the people think it is a boring walking simulator and the other half think it's a masterpiece. It is the first game Hideo Kojima made after his messy breakup with Konami, and since he had no bosses telling him what to do, he went completely crazy with his ideas. You play as Sam Porter Bridges, who was modeled after Norman Reedus from The Walking Dead, and your job is literally just to deliver packages across a destroyed America. It sounds incredibly boring on paper, but the genius is in the mechanics, because walking in this game is actually a complex puzzle. You have to balance your weight using the triggers on your controller, so if you stack too many boxes on your back, you will tip over and fall if you do not hold the left or right trigger to center yourself. You have to watch your stamina and change your boots when they wear out, and use ladders to cross rivers without getting swept away. It turns the ground itself into your enemy, and making it up a snowy mountain feels like a legitimate accomplishment.
All weapons will be locked until departure. Cargo verified.
The world is haunted by these invisible ghosts called BTs, and the only way you can sense them is by plugging a literal baby in a jar into your suit. The baby is called BB, and it cries through your controller speaker when ghosts are nearby, which is disturbing and stressful. If the ghosts catch you, they drag you into a tar pit to fight a giant whale monster made of slime. There's also this rain called Titanfall that fast forwards time for anything it touches, so your cargo containers rust and ruin the loot inside if you stay out in the storm too long. The combat is not the main focus, but you do fight these bandits called mules, who are addicted to delivering packages and want to steal your cargo. You can knock them out with a briefcase or tie them up with a bolus gun, but you are discouraged from killing because dead bodies turn into nuclear bombs in this world. The most unique feature is the social strand system, which is a fancy name for asynchronous multiplayer. You never actually see other players, but you see the things they built. You might be struggling to cross a massive canyon and then you see a bridge that another player built 3 hours ago. You can leave them a like to say thanks, and it makes you feel connected to real people, even though you are totally alone. Eventually, you unlock vehicles and zip lines, and you work together with strangers to build a massive highway system that makes deliveries super easy. The story is absolute nonsense about the afterlife and extinction events and Princess Beach, but the vibe of hiking through beautiful landscapes while low-roar music plays is unmatched. It is a slow burn and it demands patience, but it is a relaxing and hypnotic experience once you get into the rhythm of being the postman who saves the world. SOMA is hands down one of the most disturbing games ever made, but not because of jump scares or loud noises. It was made by Frictional Games, and those are the same guys who created Amnesia, so they know exactly how to make you terrified without you even realizing it. The game takes place way down at the bottom of the ocean in this facility called Pathos 2, and the atmosphere is suffocating because you can hear the metal groaning under the water pressure. You play as Simon Jarrett, who is just a normal guy from Toronto who goes in for a brain scan at a doctor's office, and then suddenly wakes up 100 years in the future in a rusty underwater base. The whole world on the surface has been destroyed by a comet, so the only things left alive are stuck down there in the dark. The gameplay is strictly hide and seek because you have zero weapons and you cannot fight back at all. The monsters are these twisted combinations of human flesh and robot parts, and they are horrifying to look at. Each monster acts differently, so some of them will attack you if you look at them, while others only hear sound, so you have to creep past them in total silence. The sound design is honestly sickening because you will hear a robot lying on the floor screaming in a human voice, begging for help because it genuinely believes it is a person. It messes with your head because you start to feel bad for the things that are trying to kill you. If you are too scared to play it normally, they actually added a safe mode where the monsters are still there but they do not attack you, so you can just focus on the story, which is the real reason to play. The story is what makes this game a masterpiece because it deals with consciousness and what it actually means to be human. It introduces this idea of the coin flip, where if you copy your brain into a new body, you do not actually transfer over. The new you wakes up in the new body, but the old you is still stuck in the old body. It is a terrifying concept that the game forces you to face over and over again. You spend the game trying to launch this thing called the Ark, which is a satellite holding the brain scans of the last humans into space to save humanity. The ending is widely considered one of the best and saddest endings in video game history. It does not pull any punches, and it will leave you sitting there staring at your screen in silence for 10 minutes, just trying to process what happened. It is a psychological horror game that stays with you forever, because the horror is not about dying, it is about existing.
Warning. Reactor collapse imminent. Proceed to the emergency
The Invincible is what happens when you step inside an old sci-fi comic book from the 1950s, and it looks absolutely stunning. You wake up on this dusty red planet called Regis 3, and your memory is totally gone, so you have no idea where your crew went. The first thing you notice is that the technology is super chunky and analog. You're not swiping holographic screens or using fancy AI. You're flipping heavy metal switches and turning mechanical dials and looking at glowing tube screens. It feels incredibly satisfying to interact with the tools because everything has a real weight and click to it.
Automata.
How subtle.
You play as Yasna, and the whole game is a mystery where you are searching for your missing friends. The map system is my favorite part, because it is literally just a paper notebook that she pulls out and sketches on. You drive this big clunky rover across the sand and look through a periscope to navigate the dunes. It is slow and lonely, but in a really immersive way, like you are actually stuck on an alien world. The planet looks empty at first, but you start finding these tiny little robots that look like metallic bushes or flies, and you have to figure out if they are alive or just machines evolving on their own.
This robot looks like it has.
It is definitely a walking simulator, so do not expect to be running around shooting aliens with laser guns. It's all about the atmosphere and the hard science fiction story. The choices you make actually change the ending and determine who makes it off the planet alive. The visuals of the red rocks against the blue sky and the retro spacesuits are just perfect, and it's a chill experience for when you want to use your brain instead of your reflexes.
What is there to understand? We have to destroy it.
Praetorians, to me!
Damn you! I knew it.